I keep my husband's secrets in a leather journal bound with copper wire. Page 1 is dated March 14th, 2011, the day I realized he was a different person than the one I married. His name is David Kessler. He teaches ethics at a prestigious university. He volunteers with at-risk youth. He donates to charities. He cries at movies about injustice. He is also a liar, a thief, and I suspect a predator. But not the kind you'd recognize. The affair wasn't the breaking point. Affairs are almost boring in their predictability. What broke me was realizing I didn't care. I found the texts while replacing his phone screen. Tender messages to someone named Riley. Hotel confirmations. Little heart emojis that made me want to laugh because they were so perfectly, pathetically him. I should have felt rage. I should have felt betrayed. What I felt was nothing. A kind of clinical emptiness, like discovering a character in a book I'd already closed. When I confronted him, he cried. He said it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, that he'd been feeling invisible in our marriage. He said Riley meant nothing. He said he'd end it immediately. He was very convincing. The thing is, I believed him. I just didn't care if he was telling the truth. That's when I started the journal. Not for evidence, not for a divorce. I'm still trying to understand why I did it. Maybe because I'd spent 7 years being David Kessler's wife without ever really knowing him, and I was curious what I might discover if I actually paid attention. The affair ended, or so he said. But I noticed other things now that I was looking. The way he talked about his student mentee, a quiet girl named Sophia. The particular kind of attentiveness he gave her, different from how he treated other students. Careful. Grooming, I think is the word. Not sexual, not yet, but something underneath it all that made my skin crawl. I documented it. The extra office hours. The coffee meetings. The way he found reasons to touch her shoulder. The compliments about how mature she was for her age. How she seemed to understand him in ways other people didn't. Page 42. He's teaching her to need him. I attended one of his lectures. Watched him command the room with his intelligence and charm. Watched Sophia watch him. And I understood something that made me feel sick. He was addictive. He made you feel seen, understood, special. Until suddenly you weren't. Until you were replaced by how many girls had there been before me? How many after? I hired a private investigator named Marcus Chun, but not to build a divorce case. I told him I was writing a book about charismatic men who abuse trust. He didn't need to know it was about my husband. What Marcus found was worse than infidelity. 3 formal complaints from students in David's first year's teaching. All dropped or resolved quietly. All involving inappropriate relationships with young women. There was a restraining order from 2008 that had been mysteriously expunged from public records. A settlement from a university in another state. David had left that job suddenly, and no one seemed to remember why. The university's HR knew. They had to know. But knowing and proving are different things, and David had been careful. He was always careful. This is criminal, Marcus said, sliding photos across his desk. Old complaint forms. Emails. A statement from a woman now in her 30s describing what happened when she was 19. You need to go to the police. I know, I said. I didn't go to the police. Someone younger, someone still malleable. Here's the thing about being married to someone you don't actually know. It makes you very good at lying. I told David I wanted to work on our marriage. I suggested couples therapy with a specific therapist I'd selected, a woman who specialized in trauma and had academic connections to the university. I made sure she'd eventually do consulting work with the school's administration. I told my mother I was considering leaving him, but was taking time to think. I started meeting with a divorce lawyer, but I took no action. I was building patience like other people build muscle. I got close to Sophia. She was vulnerable in the way David liked his prey to be, smart but uncertain of her own intelligence, desperate for validation from an authority figure. I invited her to coffee. I listened to her talk about her struggles. I became, slowly, her friend. It was easy. I was already invisible to David, which meant I could move around his world like a ghost. Through Sophia, I learned that David had started giving her special projects. Private tutoring sessions. He'd mentioned she had real potential and that she reminded him of himself at her age. He was patient. He was building. I told her, very casually over coffee, that I'd noticed how much time she spent with my husband. I said it with the kind of concern that made her defensive. "He's just mentoring me," she said. "I know," I said. "That's what worries me." I told her about the other girls. Not accusingly. Gently, like I was doing her a favor. Like I was a concerned older woman. She didn't believe me at first. But I gave her Marcus's research. I told her how to search public records for the expunged complaint. I gave her the name of the woman from the settlement and told her she could reach out if she wanted to hear the story directly. I did this without anger, without vindication. I did this the way you'd set a trap and then walk away, not to watch it spring but because you know it will. Then I waited. It took 3 weeks. Sophia went to the university's Title IX office. She reported what David had been doing. She brought documentation. She brought the story from the woman he'd paid off years ago, who, as the investigation was fast. David's emails were subpoenaed. His meetings with students were reviewed. A pattern emerged that was undeniable. The university suspended him while they completed their review. By the time they finished, 3 more women had come forward. Former students from his previous job. A teaching assistant. A colleague's daughter. David came home the day they made the suspension public. He was shaking. He tried to explain it away as a misunderstanding, a witch hunt, jealousy from students he'd given poor grades to. I listened while making dinner. I didn't look at him. "Say something," he demanded. "Say anything." "What would you like me to say?" I asked. "That you believe me. That you know me." I turned to face him. "I do know you, David. That's the only reason I'm still here." He asked for a divorce 2 days later. Said he couldn't bear my judgment. Said he needed to rebuild his life away from someone who'd stopped believing in him. I agreed immediately. I took the settlement he offered without negotiating. Less money, the smaller house, no alimony. He was so relieved that I wasn't fighting him that he barely noticed what he was signing away. The criminal case took longer. The university pressed charges. So did one of the women. The media coverage was brutal. His name became synonymous with predation. His book, a bestseller on leadership and integrity, was pulled from stores. Universities where he'd given lectures distanced themselves. His mother stopped speaking to him. His brother released a statement saying they were no longer in contact. 2 years later, I'm living in a cottage by the water. Sophia graduated and got into a good graduate program. She sent me a thank you card that said simply, "You saw what was happening." The truth is, I had always seen it. From the very beginning, I think. I just didn't know how to name it. I thought if I was quiet enough, small enough, invisible enough, he would eventually see me and be the person I needed him to be. What I learned instead was this. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop trying to change someone and simply let them become exactly who they are. I didn't destroy David Kessler. He destroyed himself. I just made sure he couldn't destroy anyone else while doing it. The journal is still on my nightstand, though I haven't written in it for months. Sometimes I think about burning it. Sometimes I think about publishing it. But mostly I just leave it there, a record of the moment I stopped being his wife and started being a witness to who he actually was. It's the best thing I ever wrote. I ran into David at a grocery store 6 months ago. He didn't recognize me at first. I'd cut my hair. I'd gained weight. I'd stopped disappearing. When he realized who I was, his face went pale.
"Barbara," he said.
"I've been meaning to reach out. I know things were complicated, but I'd like to explain." "No," I said. It was the easiest word I'd ever spoken. You don't get to explain. You don't get to reframe. You don't get to make this about miscommunication or misunderstanding. He tried anyway. He talked about his struggles, his childhood, his own trauma. He made himself the protagonist of his own victimhood. I watched him do it with the kind of clinical interest I developed over the years. How quickly he adapted his narrative. How he centered himself even in his own destruction. "David," I said when he finished, "you're still the only person you've ever been able to see." I left him standing in the cereal aisle, holding a box of granola he'd probably selected based on what he thought a reformed man would eat. I never looked back. What I learned was that revenge isn't satisfying because it doesn't change anything. It's satisfying because it's honest. And sometimes honesty is the most dangerous thing a quiet woman can offer. Not rage, not drama, just the simple, devastating truth.